everyone, and welcome to Discourse on Radio GBX. My name is Josh, and we're here with James and Dane, and we're going to be talking some interesting topics today. So kind of just get right into it. So was it last week? Congress passed 4 big bills that are kind of all tied together, but 3 of them are foreign aid bills, and then one of them is a ban of TikTok. And the 3 foreign aid bills have a lot of contention around them from both sides of the aisle, because we had a bill to fund or give more defense money to Ukraine, which had dried up more or less after Republicans in Congress had stalled further aid to Ukraine. And then we had aid to Israel, which had also kind of not necessarily been stalled, but had been debated about because there are a lot of contentions, and also because the Israel aid had been tied to Ukraine aid. Also border security, but that's a whole other thing. And then there's also aid for Taiwan. So just to get right into it, how do we feel about the passage of these bills?
I feel like it is a prime example of the government, not really meeting the needs of the people. Like I heard echoed that usually it requires 60 votes or so to pass anything, and that's what always I've been told is it requires 60 votes to pass.
I think it's 60 to bring it to the floor.
Yeah. And
just 51 to pass.
Yeah, well, but you hear that you need a significant majority of people. So when I saw the amount of votes that this bill got, 79, I think, was the total. It was really disheartening to see that there are issues, such as economic issues, the lack of access to healthcare that people are receiving, that are just kind of, for lack of a better term, like floundering right now. And we're investing a lot of our efforts into banning TikTok and providing foreign aid for perpetual wars. So it was really disheartening for me to see personally. But
James, do you have any?
I've got slightly different opinions on all of these. The foreign aid to Taiwan seems like basic bog standard U.S. foreign policy. Like we're investing in the place that we get a lot of our chips from, and who China has been murmuring about taking over lately. So that one makes sense to me. I find the foreign aid to Ukraine to be really interesting because Speaker Johnson opposed it for a very, very long time, and then all of a sudden you get some classified briefings and he can't bring it up fast enough against like the wishes of some of the farther right members of his own party. I am disappointed to see. I'm really disappointed to see aid for Israel tied to that, because I believe any investment we make into the region should be going to humanitarian causes.
Yeah.
And ending the conflict. I'm really not happy about it. I don't know any of the stuff that goes on in the back room. For Speaker Johnson to flip so dramatically about Ukraine, where he's literally kind of risking his own speakership over it, I'm thinking there must be something in one of those intel briefings that made support for Ukraine really critical. And I guess I see how aid for Israel got tied into that, but I'm not happy about it. I am glad that I think there are about 35 Democrats that opposed the bill, because it included aid to Israel, including Senator Bernie Sanders. So I'm glad to see that there is, a group in the Democrat Party that is starting to provide some pushback. But, the best time to provide pushback would have been on October 8th. The second best time is now, but...
Why do you think that the bills were like tied together and to kind of encourage more votes, or?
Yeah, I think it's throwing everybody, like, there is a faction on the right that wants to provide aid for Israel but opposes aid to Ukraine. There's a faction on the left that wants to provide aid to Ukraine but opposes it to Israel. So I think it was a pure political move maneuver to give everybody a little bit of what they want and something that they didn't like. I think that's your typical compromise position, which like a political science perspective, I understand why it happened that way. I'm just not particularly happy about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised either at this point. I mean, it's kind of become the normalcy that we've experienced in politics, but it's just frustrating. And as an avid TikTok user myself, it's quite frustrating that I'm not going to be able to enjoy even just some of the non-political videos that I watch. I mean, obviously it's not banned completely yet, and we'll see. I'm imagining that there's going to be some sort of litigation about it. I would most certainly bet, if I was a betting man, that was going to happen. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, I was pretty disappointed, especially that got lumped in with it.
Yeah, and then the TikTok bill was to force the Chinese company, which owns TikTok, to sell it to a U.S.-based company, which I find an interesting thing that it's like, oh, it has to be owned by the United States, which is interesting. But I suppose lots of people in the United States use TikTok. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously it's kind of contentious. I mean, it's no secret to anybody that we're in kind of a pseudo Cold War with China at the moment. But it's really strange to me that there has been built up this fear in the American population of like China meddling in our foreign affairs, when, I mean, if you look at it and you know anything about China and how the CCP works, any foreign company that is doing any sort of business in China has a member of the CCP that by law has to sit on the board. So you name a company, if they have factories in China, there is somebody from the CCP that is sitting on their board. And the owner of TikTok is not Chinese, as he said in an interview that kind of went viral earlier in the fall, where he kept being badgered about any sort of involvement with the CCP, and he kept replying, Senator, I'm from Singapore, I live in Singapore. So I don't understand why there's all this fear over China, especially when U.S. companies are basically doing the same thing and have the same capability.
I think, well, China does not allow the United States to own any Chinese media companies. And I'm actually completely for the TikTok ban, but not for the same reasons as you see like argued about in the media. First of all, I don't care that much about data privacy. We have no federal laws regulating it. If you've got a smartphone in your pocket, you've agreed to give away your data for free to a ton of companies already. Like the Chinese government can have all your data in 4 seconds. They just have to buy it. Like it's already out there. My concern is, well, first of all, I should say there's precedent. This is not the first time that America has forced the sale or banning of a Chinese-owned social media app. The last one, if I remember correctly, the last one this happened to was Grindr. It was Chinese-owned, and they forced its sale. And the same thing's happening here, because we do have laws restricting foreign ownership of media companies, and I don't see why social media should be excluded from that. And my main concern with TikTok and why I'd advocate for the ban is that now American companies being in control of the social media algorithms that frame the issues and decide what issues are being considered and talked about is problematic by itself, but that's more problematic when the algorithm is controlled by a pseudo hostile nation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can agree with a large chunk of that, especially, the whole thing with our data. Like, every social media, I'm sure everybody that's listening or will listen sees every time you go on a website, there's the cookies, request where you can accept and decline. And even then, if you hit decline, it's not really doing a whole lot. But it's just, and like you mentioned that James, you mentioned that the United States doesn't really own a media company in Asia, which as far to my knowledge is true. But the company ByteDance, I believe from my research, is not owned. The owner and the CEO is from Singapore, but it did not seem like they weren't even incorporated in China. They're not based in China. And there's little to any evidence that's been put forth from anybody on Congress or in the committee investigating that there has been, data shared. And it's one of these things too. I mean, China, as much as we like to gesture at them being our enemy, they haven't really made any solid moves to be our enemy. I mean, they haven't really engaged in hostile action. Obviously, there's contention over Taiwan, which has been happening for a while. And, if something were to materialize there, then yeah, 100%. But it's just, in my opinion, it's just a way of kind of fear mongering. Like we did a similar thing, which there actually was proof of Russian interference in the election and in minor areas. But yeah, in my opinion, I totally agree with you. I just don't think, I think it's a huge overstep for the government to be banning something like this, especially something that's not inherently political. I mean, if I want to go on Taco Bell and watch a video of somebody go on TikTok, and watch a video of somebody eating Taco Bell, I could do that, and that has nothing to do with the CCP or with politics in general. So I don't see why that should be banned for any reason.
Mm-hmm. And to interject, to me, it's interesting too, because you have TikTok, obviously, which has become more controversial. I mean, it's been controversial for years. Like Trump was talking about banning it when he was president, and it's interesting to see it's still kind of a bipartisan wanting to ban TikTok. That's interesting to me. But you have and especially become more contentious with the Israel-Palestine conflict, where a lot of information younger people are getting is from TikTok. So that's kind of why it's blown up here. But it's interesting to me because you have Facebook and you have Twitter, which also peddle a lot of viewpoints that might not be the most desirable to either side. So it's interesting that you focus on banning TikTok, but not Facebook or Twitter or X, excuse me. But yeah.
So I did just look it up, and TikTok LLC is headquartered in Shanghai, or where is it? The TikTok LLC is headquartered in Singapore, but it is owned by ByteDance, which is incorporated and headquartered in Beijing. So it is it is Chinese owned.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a subsidiary. But yeah, I think all the social I hate social media. I hate it in general. I think it should have never been invented. I think it allows disinformation to spread at incredibly rapid speeds, to the point where during the COVID-19 pandemic, the WHO also described it as an infodemic because it was so difficult to find actual useful information. So I'm not going to excuse any other social media platform. I think Facebook, Instagram, Twitter especially have some serious problems. I think TikTok is just got some slightly more serious problems than the rest of them. And if it was up to me, if you want to have social media, I think it should almost be like a public service operated as the replacement for the public square. If that makes any sense, rather than operated on a per profit basis, because if you operate it on a per profit basis, the algorithm is going to push things that drive more engagement, which may not, or probably won't actually align with facts and, good civil discourse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so James, I'm actually curious. I kind of have a question. In my knowing you, and you've mentioned on the show before that you are not a fan of echo chambers, correct?
That is correct.
So then I guess I'm just curious as to how having the U.S. own every form of social media and, not having other countries really able to own versions of social media, is there no fear there of creating any sort of echo chamber?
Oh, there is I don't necessarily have to have the answers to identify a problem. And I don't know how you would do that, because even if you create a social media platform which is run by a bipartisan, you have 50% people are 50% left running the thing, you're still going to have a social media platform that is going to be invariably biased in favor of United States interests, which those are like, as you could tell with Palestine, like I don't always agree with the United States interests. And I think part of what makes a democracy strong is the ability to criticize the government. Like that's kind of your biggest check and balance is mutual distrust. So I don't know how exactly one would go about truly making like an objective town square type social media. But I think removing the profit motive from it would be an important first step.
Mm-hmm. I would agree to that, I think.
Kind of going off, you mentioned like the bipartisanship, and we talked about Speaker Mike Johnson's kind of weird pivot, or like seemingly weird pivot on this issue, because again, he had been opposing Ukraine aid since even before he was speaker. So it's weird that he suddenly, I don't know, saw the light or something, however you want to like put it, to pass Ukraine aid, and then obviously he would have wanted to pass the Israel aid too. Do you think, and there were wide margins with both Republicans and Democrats passing these bills. Obviously, I don't think it would have passed if Democrats hadn't joined Republicans, but do you think this is like any kind of shift in the, I don't know, we talk in some of my classes, we talk about political polarization a lot, so I'm kind of on top of the brain, but do you think this is not like a substantial shift, but maybe it's like a weird, like one of those moments where there can be bipartisanship?
Yeah, I guess personally, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't too much of a surprise. I was disappointed, but ultimately it wasn't a surprise. I mean, comparatively speaking, if you're looking at both political parties on like a global stage, there's really not a whole lot of difference. And this is something that James and I both have discussed in our political behavior class. And we actually were talking about today is, there's not really a solid party that is an anti-status quo party, and typically anti-status quo voices are silenced in the political process. So it wasn't surprising to see this. I don't think that this is any sort of indicator that like the parties are going to start becoming more unified or anything like that at all. I think that this was just a rare example of the game of politics being played, and they were able to capitalize on things that the Republicans were in favor of and things that the Democrats were in favor of, and then something that for some reason just a broad majority of people are in favor of in the TikTok ban. But
I think it's a combination of a couple things. I think the first thing, whatever he saw in that classified briefing changed his mind, because he was not going to act on this at all. And then all of a sudden he couldn't act fast enough. So there's something in that classified briefing that changed his mind. I think Speaker Johnson must have made some sort of deal with the Democrats, because, their Republicans are, an ideology I fundamentally disagree with on a lot of different levels. But I do also understand that the vast majority of Republicans are acting like according to their worldview, what they honestly believe is what's best for the country. Like I'll disagree with them on almost everything, but I don't believe your average Republican is a bad person. But there are a subset, just because of the razor thin margins in the House right now, which have gotten closer. Basically, a lot of House legislation has been completely held hostage by like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, and like the fringe people that all their demands are something that's never going to actually happen. And then if any legislation doesn't accede to their demands, they also have the power to completely shut it down. So I suspect is I bet Johnson and Minority Speaker Hakeem Jeffries compromised and basically said, hey, you can push this forward. We'll make sure it passes. In response, we will protect your job. Because you saw that with the previous House Speaker. He got ousted because Democrat, I think none voted to protect him because he lied to them, but they decided it wasn't their job to protect him. So they let him get removed.
Yeah, the McCarthy, because they had passed a continuing resolution to keep the government open and McCarthy relied heavily on Democrat votes to get it. And then I think he went on like CBS the next morning and was just criticizing the Democrats and just like, screw this guy. So yeah, and there have been threats of ousting Johnson, but yeah, we'll see where that goes. Kind of moving to another topic. So a lot, and this is related to our previous talk, but there's been a lot of media coverage about the protest on various college campuses like Columbia, I think New York State University, UCLA, etc. Like there's been just nonstop coverage of these events. So kind of what is the significance of these protests?
Yeah, I mean, I think that these protests are huge, quite personally, because as we've seen borne out throughout history, student protests often happen to be, looking back on a post hoc perspective, on the right side of history. I mean, you saw anti-war protests throughout Vietnam, the unfortunate Kent State massacre where protesters were injured and killed for protesting. And then, students were protesting very similarly to they are now, the apartheid regime in South Africa. You saw heavy student protests protesting the Bush administration in Iraq. So this is a natural thing, a natural response that students have that has happened multiple times throughout history. And to me, as someone who quite frankly knows some of these students across the United States that are engaging in actions like this, it's because Gen Z as a whole has kind of lost faith almost in the institutions that they belong to. I mean, we have climate change we're having to deal with. We have school shootings that are happening on seemingly a daily basis. And just all hope seems lost for a lot of these people. And so it's kind of a way of taking matters into their own hands, so to speak. So I think personally it's huge. I think it's going to be a catalyst for a lot of change. California Polytechnic, Humboldt, has had a building occupied for the greater half of a week. I believe they have 2 buildings occupied now. So I think this is huge, and I think this is, I mean, if you look at any of the other social movements, really broad student support across the nation was kind of started the the rallying cry, so to speak, for their social movements.
I mean, weren't you just protesting like last week?
We were. Definitely nothing as serious as, occupying a building or, doing an encampment or anything like that. But yeah, SDS at Green Bay has gotten involved. Tammy Baldwin came to campus last week, and it's somebody that has been to Green Bay before, and every time that she shows up, she faced protesters. She was here in March, I believe, for the Brown County Dems Gala, and I was outside with a couple of SDS members and then some other Green Bay organizations protesting that, and we got wind that she was going to be on campus, and we wanted to just show that as much as she might be welcomed here by some people, that there are people that don't like her receiving of funds from defense companies is basically what it comes down to. She has called for a ceasefire, which is appreciated. It's better than doing nothing. But in essence, a ceasefire is an absence of violence. It's not an absence of oppression. And that was something, quite frankly, that we told her. We went into the room and we read a statement. That
you started reading a statement.
We finished the statement, actually. It wasn't that long. But basically it was saying that, a ceasefire should not be used as a political tool to get people to vote for you. And it makes little sense for someone to call for peace, but then receive tens of thousands of dollars from defense companies. So that was our primary, concern. And, I think it went well. It was, I think one of the first protests that GB has had, I think in campus for quite a while, at least from what I've heard, because
right.
Things were shut down.
I think the last one we had was actually last year, right after Dobbs.
Oh, true. That would make sense. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something, that we will Definitely organize again. If she comes back, I mean, Tammy and I are kind of building quite a history. This is the second time I've been at an event protesting her being here. So,
interestingly, so this was actually my event. This is my event with Senator Baldwin, and yes, the SDS members. They came in. They read a statement. Somebody from the staff told me to remove them, so I went over there and told them nicely but forcefully that they needed to leave, and they began chanting outside pretty loudly. We could still hear Senator Baldwin, but not particularly well. And interestingly, and this is the thing that I'm kind of on two minds about, because while they were chanting outside, someone from UWGB staff asked me if they were being disruptive, saying that the university rules don't permit disruption of meetings. And, I was kind of annoyed with SDS, not because I don't believe in their message, but I don't believe in their methods. I believe you could get some better results engaging in discourse, or like being civil and sitting at the meeting and grilling them with tough questions, having someone film it, get exposure that way. Like, the protest is really noble, but there's not anybody else going to see it. So I agree with a lot of what they're trying to do, but I disagree with a lot of the methods. But that being said, I do respect their right to free speech, so I wasn't going to say, hey, no, I need them to be gone. But I'm kind of conflicted on that, because on one hand, the very act of a protest being a form of civil disobedience kind of makes the statement more powerful. Like, if there aren't any restrictions on it, then it almost means nothing. But when by engaging in protest and civil disobedience, you are risking something, whether it be like your liberty or financial penalty or arrest or something. Because it's disobedience, like, the optics on it are that you're so committed to what you're doing is right that you're willing to risk. So I'm kind of conflicted on that. I don't know what I think. Either there should be less restrictions on the ability to protest, or that because it's illegal, it makes the very act of protest more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, definitely to add on to the last thing that you said, I mean, that's 100% true. And that's the reason why you're seeing this huge influx of student protests across the country. I mean, you're seeing students occupying buildings. I mean, that is 100% illegal, but it sends a message, and it has been received. Their refugee camps in Gaza have sent messages to these students saying, we see you, we're proud of you, keep doing what you're doing. And it's working. And even the event on campus, I mean, as far as I'm aware, the event was cut short, was it not? She left earlier than it was intended. Was it not supposed to be an hour event?
It was supposed to be about 45 minutes. She left at like 37. But
okay.
But I was also supposed to give a training on how to collect signatures, and I didn't. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that, we went about it in the most suitable way. I mean, like we've discussed before, this is a genocide that's going on. This is people's money. This is taxpayer money that's going to this. And, deliberation doesn't really get you anywhere. And this has been borne out, like I've mentioned before. Every social change that has occurred in our country has been fought for. There has been civil disobedience involved with civil rights, with queer rights, with climate change, anything. The civil disobedience is a factor, because that's the only way that you're going to show, dedication, and that it truly matters to you, if you're willing to put, the legality, so to speak, on the line. And then as far as, free speech on campus, that's been a huge issue. Obviously, we're seeing across the nation, like we've mentioned, but then also here. I mean, I know that James and a couple other students too have been involved with some potential free speech issues, so to say, with like certain professors, or faculty member. It's tied in with the whole free speech on campus issue. So maybe James could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. Tell me about that, because that's been a little bit of a story that has breached the walls going outside the university.
On NBC 26.
It was on NBC 26. It was on local media. So yeah, James.
So to be clear, there is a student-led action trying to get him to face disciplinary consequences. I am not involved in that in any way. Literally, the only action I've taken was that NBC 26 interview and arguing with people on the internet. Those are the only actions that I have taken, and I got to that decision because it's a hard one to explain. Like, I strongly believe in free speech. Like, if Professor Austin if he just stuck to like misgendering people, like, I would not have done this, because it is not a crime to be a jerk. The reason I did this is because like a lot of posts on his blog like reference transgender people as terrorists and having cluster B personalities and just like this really dehumanizing language. And now obviously I'm very pro LGBTQ plus rights, but even if you aren't, for religious or whatever reasons, like there's no arguing with the fact that these are marginalized at-risk populations that have like some of the highest suicide and mental health problem rates in existence. And by treating them as, almost subhuman, that kind of goes against like what an educational institution is all about. And to quote Professor Austin, when there is moral problems, when there's moral problems, it is your duty to speak up against that. And the only action I've taken as of now is to use my freedom of speech to declare that I disagree with the stances taken by Professor Austin in the loudest, strongest possible terms. That is the only thing I've done.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see and in an issue like this being taken seriously. I will say SDS is not the ones leading this, and I don't want it to be confused that SDS is involved with any of this action. We 100% disavow everything that has been said by him, but we are, as you've all been made aware, currently occupied with the genocide that's going on. But I would also like to add on to, and I got permission from her to share this, but a good friend of both James and mine, Emma Embers, who themselves is a trans individual, has really been spearheading this. So if anybody's listening and has any questions or any way that they want to get involved in this organization, that's not really a campus organization, it's not like a club thing or anything like that, definitely reach out to them. And then also I would just like to politely say to James that misgendering is actually a gigantic deal.
Yes.
And I know you weren't saying that, but like it can seriously cause hate and self-harm, and the best thing that you can do for trans people is to recognize the gender that they are. And I'm not saying I know that you are very we share very common ideas on this. I just wanted to make that clear if anybody misinterpreted what was being said.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm not defending misgendering in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that would there is a because freedom of speech and academic freedom are very, very strongly protected, and the legal standard for when speech is actionable is hate speech, which is like legally defined as containing actual malice, like either the intent or the potential to cause harm. If that makes sense, which I am not defending misgendering at all. It is a horrible thing that only jerks do. But unfortunately, it doesn't meet that legal standard.
Mm-hmm. Kind of what is the significance of this whole deal?
So this kind of the significance is, it turns out Professor Austin has been a very controversial figure for a number of years. And, I've spoken to alumni, people who have graduated, people that have left this institution. And it turns out that every couple of years there ends up being a student movement to try and have him removed, but it never ends up going anywhere. And, tenure is a powerful thing. And I am not sure that I would possibly be able to do anything about that, but I'd like to see more transparency, because I guess the problem is that if you have to take a DJS sociology class, there's only one professor you can take it through, and that's Professor Austin. And I'd like to see like some options, like an alternative class to take, or some transparency. So if you sign up for that class, you get an email informing you that this is some of the stuff this guy has been about. Because I don't know how you can treat someone fairly that you believe these things about. Or if you're the student in that situation, how do you know you're getting treated fairly? Even if there's like surface level politeness, there is some very deep bigotry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole ton to add to that, because I'm, like I mentioned, SDS, not really something that we're organizing on. We might have an individual member or two that might be, helping out. But I'm just curious, I guess, for James, as far as I guess is more of the disappointment on the university for not taking action, or just trying to, raise this awareness to what could be said. I know, talking with a couple people, they kind of voiced the idea of, a couple of solutions, but I guess what solutions to kind of, take Josh's job a little bit as the questioner. Yeah. I guess what were the solutions that were kind of, or was there demands, or what was the...
I have not, like I said, the only action that I've taken was appearing in that NBC 26 thing. I think my purpose at the moment is to just generally create, like, I don't have the power, the platform, the ability to do much else besides speak loudly about something I find incredibly problematic. I think that's my mission at the moment, is to raise awareness, because this is it ends up being kind of a systemic institutional problem, because I know Professor Austin is fairly close to retirement, and, at some point we're going to hire a new person to fill that role. We hire new professors all the time, and I think it's, especially with all these diversity movements under attack, like from the government level lately, I think it is very important that we have processes in place to, hate and hate speech adjacent content really kind of violates the principles of an academic institution to empower the next generation. So I think it's something that the institution needs to be a lot more aware of in the future.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. I guess my fear when I first found out about it, and I'm by no means a fan of, going through institutions or anything like that. But a couple of friends of mine were, trying to compile kind of on the down low lists of, student complaints and people that were not attending classes because of comments that he had made, and their entire movement, or the beginnings of their entire movement, was squelched because of, the NBC 26 piece on him, which, there's pros and cons, obviously to both. But, now that that's happened, there are students that are afraid to, speak up about a negative interaction that has happened, or a reason they're not going to class because it's being publicized. And I totally understand why it was publicized and the need for it to be publicized. And then the other thing for me too is, we've seen with reactionary professors in the past. You know, the one thing that reactionary and, you know, very conservative MAGA adjacent people want is they want people to hate them. They want people, you see it with Jordan Peterson. That was why Jordan Peterson blew up, was because there was such a huge movement to quote unquote cancel, even though I don't really believe in cancel culture per se. So that was my biggest fear. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And I know that, you know, Emma, who is spearheading it, and some of the other students that are working on this, I'm confident that they'll get something done. That was just my initial fear.
I think it's kind of interesting. We've ended up on opposite sides of the protest versus the official channel on two different things. Like for the political change, you know, as a member of College Dems, I would definitely prefer that SDS, you know, worked more through the official channels and caused less chaos, because it would make my job a lot easier. But on the flip side, I did not trust the complaint about Austin to go anywhere through the official channels. So I guess you could say I engaged in an act of protest, which we ended up on the flip sides of two fairly similar issues.
Yeah, that is definitely really interesting now that you say that. And I guess, you know, like I mentioned, it's not me saying necessarily that I have any confidence in the institution itself. It's more that two friends of mine who, you know, this issue mattered to were going about it in a way that they saw fit, and now that's kind of being impeded on. And I had confidence more in them as individuals, I guess, than I did in the actual institution. But yeah, it is true. It is kind of interesting, James, that it's kind of been a little bit of a flip-flop there, but
it kind of shows how even with people with maybe some overlapping views have a lot of differences in how you approach those views.
Right. And it's even just more interesting too, because like it's something that we both agree needs to be changed for both issues, both things. And so that's why, you know, it's such a privilege to, number one, be on the show, but just even be able to talk about this, because there's lots of different perspectives. And you know, James and I obviously as politically involved individuals, we're definitely going to be crossing paths on numerous different things. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, like after the Baldwin thing, because he was a former College Dems board member. So after the Baldwin, I had to ask him to resign, because that's pretty bad optics having a College Dem protest Dems. And then, you know, it's probably fair, I got kicked out of the SDS Discord not long after that. So so, you know, even with people that are fairly aligned, there's a lot of room for disagreement yet.
And it shows just how like we were talking about, how you might agree. Yeah, you could just agree on the idea, but how to get to the idea is up for debate. So definitely a good like showcase of that. But that's all the time we have for this show. I'd like to thank both James and Dane for coming on again and talking about the issues and talking about, again, some maybe contentious issues.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So we'll see you guys next time. Have a good week and stay safe out there. Goodbye.